In a quiet house, the dim light filtered through the fogged window, and a father quietly held a Father's Day gift in his hand. It wasn't an expensive watch or a stylish tie, but a cheap gift, a bitter remark. "This is all I can give you." It was a constant reproach, a wound cutting deep into the father's heart, William. This is not just a story about a family. It's a story about deep wounds, painful moments, and a harsh truth. Is love always about unconditional sacrifice, or sometimes is letting go the only way to save oneself? William sat alone in the small room, with only the faint light from the setting afternoon sun streaming through the window, casting shadows on the thin beige curtains. The room wasn't large, but it contained everything that had been his for many years. Every object in the room seemed to hold its own story, memories that never faded, especially the old wooden desk, its surface worn and scratched by time, the marks on it serving as evidence of the years that had quietly passed. But above all, the old family photo on the desk was what caused his heart to ache. It was a black and white photo, lacking the sharp details of modern photographs. Under the light of bygone days, the photo reflected a past that William always wished he could return to. In the photo, William stood in the center, holding his two children, both Samantha and another child, whose face William could no longer remember. But he felt that the child had once belonged to their family. The children's mother, Jessica, stood beside him, her hand resting on William's shoulder, looking at him with eyes full of love and hope. It was a picture taken on a beautiful morning, when the family was out for a walk in the park, the child laughing joyfully in the father's arms, the mother gently reminding every step, and William feeling the simple happiness of a family with nothing but love. But now, looking at the photo, all that remained was pain. The pain wasn't because of someone's absence, but because of the emptiness he had left in the family. William knew that time could not be turned back, but he couldn't stop thinking about what had been lost, about how his life and Samantha's had changed, like rivers that, once they diverge, can never meet again. In the quiet space, only the ticking of the clock filled the air, a reminder of the passage of time. William sat there, his eyes never leaving the photo, feeling the gentle breeze coming through the window, carrying with it the damp smell of earth and the leaves changing with the season in the garden. The tree shadows swayed in the wind like unreachable figures, much like his memories. The whole house was no longer the home it once was, no longer filled with Samantha's laughter, no longer holding the simple stories they shared after every dinner. Everything now was reduced to silence, the kind of silence that suffocated him and that he couldn't explain. The light from outside the window gradually faded, and William knew that darkness was approaching, but he didn't want to leave. He just wanted to stay there, with all the memories in his heart, to relive those moments from the past, even if just for a brief moment. Every time he looked at the photo, he remembered playing with his children in the park, remembering the day Samantha looked at him with innocent eyes, as if he was the entire world to her. That memory suddenly surged back, as strong as a wave sweeping everything around it. William remembered every moment when Samantha called him her hero, with a clear voice and admiring eyes. Those were the years when he hadn't faced disappointments, hadn't witnessed endless arguments, and hadn't seen his only child turn her back on him. That world had changed, and William couldn't do anything to hold on to what had passed. The photo wasn't just an old picture, but an invisible diary that he couldn't touch. Every time he looked at it, William felt as though he were being pulled into another space, a space full of pain and regret. Was it true that every change had its price? Did love always require sacrifice, sometimes in ways that couldn't be explained? He didn't know, but he knew that, of all the things lost, there was one thing left that no one could take away. Memories, memories of the days when the family was whole, when every morning felt complete and there was no sense of being lost. But now, all of that had become the past, a past that he could never return to. Suddenly, a soft noise from the door startled William. Jessica stood there, looking at him with eyes full of concern and understanding. She didn't need to say anything, just silently standing there, watching her husband. William could feel her gaze, the presence of her beside him in moments like this. Jessica had become accustomed to these quiet moments when William was lost in his thoughts, in waves of emotion that couldn't be explained. She didn't ask him to change, didn't need him to say what he was feeling. She just needed to be with him, to give him the sense that he was not alone. Jessica walked over, sitting beside him without saying a word. She just placed her hand on his shoulder, a gentle gesture, but one full of weight. William could feel the warmth of her hand, her breath, and in that moment, he felt a kind of peace in his heart. Perhaps love didn't always need words. Sometimes the silent presence was enough. William looked into Jessica's eyes, seeing not pity, but a deep and resilient love. She had lived through so many ups and downs with him, and even when he felt lost, she had always been there by his side. Her silence was not distance, but understanding. Jessica knew that sometimes, in moments like this, nothing was needed except the quiet company of one another. William turned back to look at the photo one last time, and in that moment, he realized that even if Samantha had gone, even if there were wounds that could never be healed, at least he still had one great love. That was Jessica's love, the love of his family, imperfect but always present, always remaining. Every morning, William and Jessica woke up at the same time. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, just as it always had, the ticking sound echoing in the small kitchen. In the past days, each morning had been a continuation of peace, a part of the rhythm of life they had created together. A steady, complete life that wasn't dull. They didn't need to say much to each other. Their mornings were always moments of tranquility, warmth, and simplicity. The dining table was simply set with a cup of hot coffee, toast, and golden fried eggs. That was all, but for William and Jessica, it was all they needed. Each morning, William was usually the first to wake up, preparing coffee, choosing the beans he liked, and grinding them by hand, letting the aroma fill the space. He had been doing this for many years as an irreplaceable routine, not because he had nothing else to do, but because it was a part of life, a quiet bond between him and Jessica. Mornings like these made him feel as if time slowed down, everything seeming to stop so they could enjoy a moment together, free of worries, without thinking about pain or loss. Jessica always sat at the corner of the table, reading the newspaper or engrossed in a new book she had just started. She enjoyed the quietness of the mornings, the gentle passage of time with no rush. She didn't need lively conversations, only the warm atmosphere and the peaceful feeling of waking up beside the man she loved. This was how she had learned to live after all these years together. But today, everything suddenly changed. A phone rang, breaking the silence in the kitchen. William looked up, his gaze sliding over to the phone resting on the table. The screen lit up and a name appeared, Samantha, his daughter, a name that hadn't appeared in their lives for a long time. Samantha hadn't contacted them for the past month. Every time William tried calling her, he only received vague promises or silent rejections. There were times he sent messages, but they all returned with meaningless ellipses. Samantha had withdrawn from their lives, disappeared in a way that he couldn't understand, leaving him unsure of how to keep her close. And now, her name appeared on the screen, making William's heart beat faster, and all the peace within him shattered in an instant. Jessica looked at William with a worried gaze. She didn't need to say anything, but her expression was enough for him to realize that, for some time now, they had both felt the growing distance between them and their daughter. Samantha was no longer the little child they had raised with all their love, and when that girl called, William knew for certain that nothing about this call would be simple. He picked up the phone and answered. Samantha's voice came through, halting and frantic. "Dad, Dad, help me. I need money. A lot of money. Quickly, Dad." Her voice was choked, as though she was struggling to hold back sobs in every word. William felt a coldness of fear rising in his chest. The feeling was like a fire burning, making everything around him blur. Samantha had never spoken to him like this. She had always been strong, sometimes stubborn, but never showing such weakness. "How much?" William asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Although his mind was racing with 1,000 questions, he tried not to let the worry show. 30,000. 30,000 right now, Dad. If not, I don't know what to do." Samantha cried on the phone, no longer the confident daughter, but a girl on the brink of despair. The whole kitchen fell silent, suffocating. Jessica looked at William, her eyes unable to fully express the worry, but there was deep empathy in them. She had feared this day would come. She knew that after everything, Samantha would never escape this spiral without change. But was this the moment they had to let go? William held the phone, silent for a moment, letting Samantha's words settle in his mind. He tried to find a solution, but all he felt was confusion. Calls like this had become all too familiar to him. Samantha was no longer the little girl she used to be. Now she had become someone he didn't recognize. From when she dropped out of school to unhealthy relationships to times when she withdrew from the family, Samantha had gradually transformed into a stranger, someone he couldn't save. Jessica stood up, walking toward William, saying nothing but placing a hand on his shoulder. William could feel the warmth from her hand, but inside, the worry and helplessness still lingered. "William, I know this is hard, but we can't keep giving her money without seeing any change." Jessica spoke softly but firmly. "We've done everything we can, but she keeps making the same mistakes. Are we spoiling her too much?" William looked into Jessica's eyes, seeing the worry in her gaze. He knew he couldn't continue living in this vicious circle. He was exhausted by these cries for help, tired of giving assistance that never led to results, but his love for his daughter made it impossible to say the words of rejection. "So, what do you think we should do?" William asked, his voice quiet as if he were searching for an escape for himself. "We have to let her stand on her own, William. If not, we'll forever be the endless crutch for her wrong decisions," Jessica said, looking at him with a determined gaze. "No one can change Samantha's life except for her." A long silence filled the air. William didn't respond immediately. He turned back to look at the phone in his hand, then back at Jessica. He knew deep down that he had to make a decision. Over the years, he had kept giving, but was that the right way to help? Could these repeated acts of saving her ever rescue Samantha, or would they only cause her to sink deeper into her mistakes? In that moment, a difficult but necessary decision began to form in William's mind. He sighed, gently pressing the button to end the call, then turned to look at Jessica. They didn't need to say anything more, but in their eyes there was empathy and understanding. They knew that, although it hurt, sometimes real love wasn't about continuing to endure, but knowing when to let go. William sat there in the cozy kitchen where everything continued as usual, following the familiar rhythm of daily life. From the small table in the corner of the room, he looked out the window where the morning sunlight streamed through the trees, casting dappled patches of light on the ground. This peaceful scene had become an irreplaceable part of his life. Every morning, William woke up with Jessica. They had breakfast together, shared small stories about their day, like the stones that built the home they had painstakingly created over the years. However, today was different from the other days. William seemed unable to find joy in the simple routines anymore. Though he still sat here in the kitchen he had lived in for so many years, still hearing the drip of coffee falling into the pot, all he felt was emptiness. Samantha's calls, the times she asked for help, the moments when he couldn't refuse, everything was weighing heavily on his mind. He was exhausted by it all, exhausted from the endless cries for help, exhausted by his own helplessness and not being able to change his daughter, exhausted by a love that couldn't save anyone. Jessica sat across from him, her eyes still full of worry but never leaving him. She silently sipped her tea, her hands gently running along the mortar on the table as if seeking comfort in the stability of familiar things. She didn't need to say anything because she understood that right now William didn't want advice or reassurance. He just needed some space to face himself. Every time Samantha called, everything seemed to explode inside William. His daughter, whom he had poured so much love and care into, was now trapped in a never-ending cycle with no way out. She always turned to him when in trouble, when she needed money, when she needed saving. But when would she stand on her own feet? When would she grow up and become independent? Dad, Dad, help me. I need money. A lot of money. Samantha's plea echoed through the phone, no longer the voice of strength or resilience, just a frantic, sobbing tone. William couldn't help but feel pain, hearing those words. But the pain wasn't just from her desperation, it was the feeling of powerlessness that was taking over his heart. He had done everything, had always been there, always helped his daughter, but it seemed like every effort was in vain. Each time he helped, each time he reached out, it only made her sink deeper into the abyss of dependence. Had he been wrong all along, continuing to help her without realizing that he was making her weaker? Jessica had seen the changes in William over the years. He was no longer the strong man she had fallen in love with, no longer the steadfast husband with whom she had shared every sorrow. Now he was just a tired man, trying to find a way out of the chaos he had created himself. Jessica said nothing, only silently looked at her husband. She knew that if anyone understood this exhaustion, it was her. She could feel the pain, the disappointment, and the fear of having to face decisions they couldn't avoid, but she also knew that every time Samantha called, every time she asked for money or help, it was a reminder of the rift in their family. She had seen clearly that Samantha not only lacked independence, but was also draining her parents' strength. With each act of help, Jessica felt like she was falling into an endless repetition of the past. Jessica gently set her teacup down on the table and walked over to William. She didn't say anything, only placed her hand gently on his shoulder as if to say that she was here, always ready to listen, even though she didn't know what she could do. William felt the warmth of her hand, but it couldn't dispel the coldness in his heart. He looked up, his tired eyes meeting hers, and finally he sighed. "You know, don't you?" he asked, his voice hoarse, as if he were too weary of himself. Jessica didn't respond immediately. She just nodded slowly. She knew that William wasn't just asking her, he was asking himself. Should they continue like this? Were they doing the right thing? Every time he helped Samantha, he felt he was pushing her further away, because that dependence was not creating any change. And now he had to face a painful truth. Samantha couldn't be saved without change from her. They both sat in silence, neither saying anything further. The air in the room was the same, warm but heavy. Sometimes silence was the only way they could face exhaustion, disappointment, and a sense of helplessness. William looked into Jessica's eyes, his own eyes now becoming more tired. "Maybe we've been too weak, Jessica. I can't go on like this anymore. She'll never change if we keep pulling her out of this pit." Jessica didn't answer, but her eyes shone with understanding. She knew that no matter how much they loved their children, there were times when love wasn't enough to save them. Sometimes the only love they could offer was letting go, but letting go wasn't giving up. It was allowing the children to take responsibility for their lives, to give them a chance to learn from their mistakes and grow. The phone rang again, but this time, William didn't rush to answer. He looked at the screen and saw Samantha's name again. In that moment, he realized that not every time could someone be saved. Sometimes, letting them stand up on their own was the most loving thing to do. "Are you ready?" William asked, turning to look at Jessica, as if seeking her support. Jessica didn't say anything, but her hand tightened around his firmly. They knew this would be a difficult decision, but they also understood that it was time for change, not just for Samantha, but for themselves. "I'm doing this for our whole family," Jessica whispered, and in that moment, both of them knew that the wordless fatigue they were feeling was the first step toward the change they needed. Despite the challenges ahead, at least now, they could see a new path beginning to emerge. The mornings in William and Jessica's home always began with familiar routines. Each day, William would wake up first, step into the kitchen, and brew a cup of black coffee, no sugar, as a way to shake off the long night. The soft sounds of the morning, the first rays of sunlight coming through the window, and the birds singing from the garden all created a peaceful, familiar space that had been a comforting part of their lives for years. William found peace in those moments, feeling as though all worries and exhaustion could temporarily be put on hold. Jessica, his wife, would wake up soon after. She'd enter the kitchen, her eyes bright and warm as they met his. They didn't need to speak much, as the unspoken words had been replaced by glances, gestures, and quiet pauses filled with understanding. They had shared many years together, through all the joy, sorrow, anger, and pain, but still found peace when they were with each other. These mornings, though ordinary, always reminded them that life still had meaning. Today, however, that morning was different. As William finished preparing his coffee, a small box suddenly appeared on the table. It was wrapped in simple paper, with no ornate decorations or signs indicating that it was a special gift. His first reaction was surprise. This box wasn't something he had been waiting for, nor was it something that would bring him joy. He stared at it, feeling an ambiguous emotion, one difficult to explain. Jessica saw the box and immediately recognized it as a gift from Samantha, a Father's Day gift. It had been a long time since Samantha had sent anything to her father, not because she didn't love him, but because the distance between them had only grown. Yet on special days like this, she would always find a way to send him something, even if it was just an insignificant item. Jessica said nothing, just quietly looked at the gift with an expression filled with concern, as if she knew this gift would bring more disappointment than joy. William picked up the box, his hands trembling slightly. He didn't open the gift immediately, but left it on the table for a moment, as though trying to prolong the time to prepare himself. The feeling inside him was one of unexplainable emptiness. He knew and could sense that this gift was not a substitute for the affection he had given to Samantha, but rather a clear indication of the growing distance between them. Slowly, he opened the box. Inside was a simple porcelain mug, unremarkable with a grayish-white color. It had strange geometric drawings on it that didn't seem to connect with anything in William's mind. It wasn't a personal gift, nor was it something that would bring back cherished memories of the gifts Samantha had made for her father before. This was a soulless gift, cheap and lacking in emotional depth. Beneath the mug was an old receipt, clearly used several times. It was a receipt from a discount store. The combination of the gift and the receipt made William feel as though he had been slapped in the face. All he saw was thoughtlessness, the lack of consideration from his daughter, a cheap receipt, a worthless mug, and what remained was the coldness Samantha had created for herself and for the family. William couldn't help but feel pain. This gift was not a symbol of love, but a clear reflection of the distance between them. He reached up and gently touched the mug, feeling its coldness. Inside him, a sense of emptiness washed over him. This gift wasn't an exchange of affection between father and daughter. It was a failure, a clear sign that Samantha was no longer the daughter he had once loved. She had become someone entirely different, someone who no longer remembered the value of love, care, or the beautiful memories they had built over the years. William's gaze blurred as he looked down at the receipt. The numbers on it appeared clearly in his mind, like a punch to the heart. He knew this wasn't the first time Samantha had done something like this. In the past, whenever she needed help, whenever she asked for money, William had always been ready to help. But now, looking at this gift, he realized that everything had changed. His daughter no longer needed help from him in the same way. She was merely exploiting his love, and he had not seen the truth. Jessica walked over to William, looked at the mug, then met his eyes. She didn't need to ask how he felt, because she already knew the answer. She looked at him with eyes full of concern, but also full of understanding. She knew that William had spent his entire life loving Samantha. But now, everything was different. Samantha wasn't just ignoring her father's love. She was making him feel useless, incapable of helping her escape the cycle of weakness and dependence. William looked at the mug again. He couldn't help but feel disappointed. He hadn't expected an extravagant gift, but at the very least, it should have been an expression of love, of real care. But now, all he had was a cheap mug and an old receipt, a meaningless gift, a clear reflection of a change he couldn't bear. Jessica. William softly called his wife's name, his voice weary. What did we do wrong? Jessica remained silent for a moment, not answering immediately. She felt the pain in William's eyes, and she knew he was blaming himself. He was wondering if he had been wrong to love Samantha so much, if he had been wrong to give her so much affection and help without realizing that she had changed. You're not wrong, William, Jessica finally spoke, her voice gentle but firm. We just loved her too much. And sometimes loving someone doesn't mean always shielding them. She needs to learn how to stand on her own, how to face the consequences of her own decisions. William said nothing. He sat there, staring at the mug in his hands. A sense of emptiness enveloped him. But then he realized that perhaps this was the moment to let go, to let Samantha stand on her own and learn from her mistakes. This Father's Day gift, though empty in material value, contained a clear message. It was time for Samantha to learn how to live, not to rely on her parents' love forever. A long silence stretched between them. Jessica gently placed her hand on William's shoulder, as if to say that she would always be there for him, no matter what happened. And even if they had to let go, they would always be a family. The entire house remained still in the soft morning light. William sat in the corner of the dining room, the cup of coffee he had made long ago now cold in his hand. He couldn't drink it, though before, every morning, he loved the rich taste of black coffee, hot, awakening his mind and body. But today, even his favorite coffee couldn't shake the emptiness inside. The feeling of exhaustion had overtaken him, like a shadow that could not be separated from him. Jessica sat opposite him, her gaze occasionally drifting to William, but she didn't say anything. She knew that now, in this moment, no words could solve the conflict within him. Jessica had seen William silently struggle with himself many times before, but this time was different. He was more tired than ever, and there was one thing she knew for certain. They could not continue like this. The calls from Samantha, the meaningless gifts, the constant demands from their daughter had forced William and Jessica to face a truth they had long avoided. Their love for Samantha was too great, too deep, and they had sheltered her so much that now they were gradually losing themselves. William, Jessica spoke gently, but with firm conviction, we're losing ourselves. Her words struck straight to William's heart. He looked up, his eyes weary and filled with disappointment as they met hers. Her words were a harsh truth he had tried to avoid, a warning he had not wanted to hear. But now, as she spoke them, he could not ignore the reality he had been hiding for so long. Jessica looked directly into William's eyes, not avoiding his gaze. She knew that if they didn't face the truth, if they didn't speak it out, they would only sink deeper into an endless exhaustion. I know you love Samantha, and I know you've done everything you can to help her. But do you realize that we're so tired that we no longer recognize ourselves? You've forgotten what's most important. You've forgotten that we can't keep pampering her without any change. She needs to stand on her own, but we can't let her do that. William felt a suffocating pressure in his chest, but he couldn't argue. Every word from Jessica was like a mirror reflecting himself. He had tried his best. He had loved. He had cared. But it seemed that everything had only made his daughter more distant, more incapable of standing on her own. Her decisions, her endless pleas, hadn't helped her change. They had only made her weaker, and he and Jessica had gradually lost their patience and peace in life. Jessica took a deep breath, continuing, her voice still gentle but filled with determination. We've lost ourselves in these endless efforts, William. I love you, but I also love myself, and I love our family. If we continue like this, we'll lose everything. We've lived for Samantha for so long, and now we've forgotten ourselves. Can't you see it? We become people who constantly chase after her pleas, always trying to help her, forgetting that we also need care and love. William remained silent. Jessica's words sank into his mind like a cold stream, washing away the muddled thoughts inside him. He had given everything. He had sacrificed so much, but it seemed everything just circled back in a never-ending, hopeless cycle. His beloved daughter was lost, and in all that time he had forgotten himself. Jessica looked into William's eyes, seeing the fatigue and the struggle within them. She knew her words wouldn't be easy to accept, but she also knew that if they didn't change, they would forever live in the shadow of unreciprocated sacrifices. William, I'm not saying that you don't love Samantha, but love isn't about giving without receiving. You can help her, but if she doesn't change, we'll lose everything. If we continue like this, we'll have nothing left. Jessica's words were like a ray of light in the darkness. William sat in silence for a long time, his eyes looking down at the table, where papers and receipts lay scattered in disarray. He felt like a stranger in his own home, like a man who no longer knew who he was, just throwing himself into saving others while forgetting himself. He had sacrificed so much for Samantha, but she hadn't changed. She couldn't stand up on her own, and he had been too weak to let her face life's challenges. William sighed, not out of exhaustion, but because the truth was too clear. He knew no matter how much he loved her, if Samantha didn't change, they couldn't continue living like this. You're right, Jessica. I've done everything without realizing that I'm exhausted. We can't keep living for Samantha while forgetting ourselves. I've been too weak. Jessica squeezed his hand, a gesture without words, but enough to say it all. She didn't demand anything from him, but she wanted him to recognize the truth, to understand that real love sometimes means patience, sometimes letting the ones you love stand on their own, to face life instead of always chasing them in their endless mistakes. We need to live for ourselves, William, Jessica said, her voice filled with determination. If not, we won't be ourselves anymore. Love isn't about unconditional sacrifice. It's about making the right choices. You can love Samantha, but loving her also means teaching her to stand on her own. William looked into Jessica's eyes, feeling the resolve in every word she spoke. He knew this was an important moment, a time to face the truth and accept it. He couldn't keep living in Samantha's shadow, couldn't keep pampering and helping her without considering himself. He had to start over, not just for Samantha, but for his family, for Jessica, and for himself. You're right, William sighed, for the first time feeling a sense of relief in his heart. It's time for us to change. Jessica smiled, her eyes sparkling with understanding and love. We'll make it, William. No matter how difficult it gets, we'll get through it together. In that moment between them, a wordless change began. It wasn't about giving up, but about deeply understanding that sometimes true love is knowing when to let go. Love isn't about saving someone at all costs. It's about giving them the chance to stand on their own, to learn the value of going through challenges themselves. And throughout that journey, love will never leave them, even if it can't always be seen. That day, the entire atmosphere in William's house seemed to quiet down. All that was left were the slow ticking of the clock, unhurried, unnoisy. The silence made even the smallest sound stand out, like a reminder of the absence of the old days. Samantha had been away from the family for a long time, and today, when she returned, everything was different. The house remained the same, but William's heart felt like an old house about to collapse, just waiting for a strong gust of wind to blow open all the memories he had tried so hard to hide. The feeling of a father confronting his daughter after so many years of distance is indescribable. Memories of Samantha flooded back like a powerful wave sweeping over William's mind. The image of her as a child, always waiting for him to return from business trips, her eyes full of pride and love, always calling him hero. every time she ran to hug him, saying no one could do anything without him. Each of those words was a promise in William's heart, a source of motivation to do everything possible for the family, for his daughter. But now, standing before him was a grown woman, no longer with that innocent gaze, but with an unfamiliar and distant look. Samantha was no longer the little girl he once knew. She no longer called him hero, and no longer saw him as someone indispensable in her life. The calls for help, the constant requests for money, the meaningless gifts only intensified the suffocating feeling in his heart. The woman standing before him now seemed like a stranger, not because she had changed, but because he was no longer the person she turned to for help. The things he had done for her no longer made her feel that love, and he too could not understand how his daughter had changed. Samantha walked into the living room, looked around, and then her gaze stopped on William's face. A heavy silence fell between them. She didn't speak, only stood there as if trying to face the father she hadn't seen in so long. William stood up, walked towards her, and then they looked at each other, the distance between them wider than anything measurable. The daughter William had always loved now made his heart heavy. It had been a long time since he had seen innocence in her eyes. All that remained was helplessness, disappointment in every meeting, unspoken rejections, and repeated pleas for help. Every time he looked at Samantha, he could only feel the ever-growing distance between them. Samantha looked into her father's eyes, her expression full of confusion, but also self-blame. "Dad," she whispered, her voice weak, as if unsure of where to begin. William didn't respond immediately. He just stood there in silence for a few seconds, looking into his daughter's eyes. Memories of a Samantha who once trusted him, loved him, and called him hero now felt like broken pieces. He wanted to hug her, tell her everything would be okay, that he was always ready to help, but he didn't know if those words still held any meaning. The woman standing before him was no longer the little girl who had looked at him with such trust. Samantha no longer needed him as she once did. She had made her own decisions, choices he couldn't understand, steps he couldn't keep up with. Samantha finally spoke, but her words didn't have the strength they once did. "Dad, I'm sorry. I don't know what to do anymore." William felt his heart tighten. Those words of apology couldn't mask the truth in his heart. Samantha had changed, and he couldn't change her. He had done everything he could, but it seemed like all efforts were in vain. The daughter he had raised and protected now made him feel powerless. Everything he had done, everything he had sacrificed for her, now felt like a burden. William's vision blurred, and a wave of pain rose in his chest. The memories of the past flooded back, every time Samantha had called him hero, making his heart warm and happy. The mornings when she would sit next to him, her bright eyes looking at him as if he was her entire world. The times he took her to the park, the nights they read together, each of her words echoing in his mind like an old song. But now, all of that was gone. Samantha was no longer the innocent daughter, but someone he couldn't understand, someone he couldn't reach. "I love you, Samantha," William said, his voice choked, as if wanting to say all the words he hadn't said. "I love you more than anything, but I can't help you if you don't want to change. I can't keep doing everything for you without seeing you move forward." Those words were like a knife cutting through William's heart, but he knew they were the truth. Love couldn't be unconditional sacrifice. His daughter couldn't live in his protection without changing. If she didn't learn to stand on her own, all his help would be in vain. Samantha stood there, her eyes filled with regret and pain. She wanted to say something, but didn't know where to begin. Over the years, she had run away from the family, from her parents' love, and now she realized she had lost the most important things. She wanted to apologize, wanted to say she would change, but was it too late? Could her father's love save her? "Dad, I've been wrong, I know," Samantha choked. "I've been distant from you for so long, and now I don't know how to get back what I've lost." William felt the pain in her words, and in that moment, a part of his heart shattered. He wanted to say everything would be okay, that she could still change, that he would always be here. But those words couldn't come out. She was grown now, had made her own decisions, and he couldn't do more than let her face the consequences of her mistakes. But a part of William still couldn't give up. She was still his daughter, and no matter how painful it was, a father's love couldn't easily be extinguished. "You can still change, Samantha," William said, his voice gentle but resolute. "I won't give up on you. But you have to stand up on your own, face everything. If you love me, you have to take responsibility for your life." A long moment passed between them, no one saying anything more. Samantha stood there, and finally she stepped toward William. Without thinking, she embraced him. In that embrace, all the distance between them seemed to fade. Samantha was no longer the little girl who had called him hero, but she was still his daughter. And in that moment, their love was rekindled. That evening, like every other, William sat in his study. The room was dim, with the yellowish light from the desk lamp casting a faint glow over the financial papers scattered across the table, creating a silent, weary scene. He picked up his pen, looking at the numbers on the paper, but none of it seemed clear. Each sum, each figure appeared like an invisible burden, tormenting his mind. Every time he saw the numbers on the bills or financial statements, a sense of disappointment overtook him, one that was impossible to conceal. His daughter Samantha continued to ask for help, each time for a larger amount of money, and each request more demanding than the last. William had never been able to refuse, always feeling that he had an obligation to help her because she was his daughter. But now, looking at the numbers, looking at everything he had done, he couldn't help but feel a sense of guilt. He knew that he had made Samantha weak, dependent on him, that everything he had done only pushed her away from responsibility, keeping her from facing reality and letting her continue to live in the shelter of her parents. William's heart felt heavy. He had loved Samantha unconditionally, given his youth, his mind, to care for and protect her, but now all those efforts seemed meaningless. She hadn't learned to be independent, hadn't learned to face her mistakes. And now he had to face a truth he didn't want to admit. His love for her might have been too indulgent, and that indulgence was not the right way to love. That suffocating feeling enveloped him like a shadow that couldn't be erased. He wanted to keep loving her, wanted to save her from all her difficulties, but he also knew that if he continued to do so, she would never grow up. Every time he sent her money, every time he told her everything would be fine, it only drove her further away. Loving is not about indulgence, William told himself quietly. It was a mantra he repeated to convince himself. He understood that without change, without allowing Samantha to face life and her mistakes, everything he did would only deepen her dependency and entrench her in mistakes she couldn't escape from. He had sheltered her too much, tolerated too many of her wrong choices, and now he realized it was time to stop. William looked at the papers in front of him. The sums of money he had sent Samantha were not just figures. They represented sacrifices, the unconditional love he had given to his daughter. He stared at those numbers, and in a moment of stillness, a sense of resolve rose within him. He knew that, in order to truly love Samantha, he couldn't continue helping her unconditionally. Love wasn't indulgence. Love was about being firm, about letting the person you love stand on their own and take responsibility for their life. He picked up his pen again, looking at the expenses he had written down. Every transfer of money, every act of help now only felt heavier. Regardless, he had done everything he could, but what he needed to do now was stop. It was time for Samantha to stand on her own, to learn to face the challenges in life, to learn independence and not remain dependent on her parents. A painful feeling rose in William's chest once more. He loved Samantha. That was beyond question. But he realized that without change, without this decision, they would forever live in a cycle of unreciprocated sacrifice. He knew that stopping his financial support would anger her. It might hurt her, but he also understood that without doing so, he couldn't help her become independent. He couldn't remain her unconditional crutch. He needed to stop, not because he didn't love her, but because love was about giving her the chance to stand on her own, to take responsibility for her life. William sighed, pushed the financial papers aside, and stood up. He walked to the window and looked outside. The scenery outside hadn't changed. The trees in the garden rustled in the wind. The streetlights blinked faintly in the dark night. But inside him, everything had changed. He knew this decision wouldn't be easy, but it was the right one. He no longer feared the consequences. He understood that if he didn't do this, not only Samantha, but he and Jessica would lose the peace in their lives. In that moment, William felt a strange sense of relief. He no longer felt torn between his love for his daughter and the need to help her. He knew that true love was about giving in the right way, letting the ones you love learn how to stand on their own, to take responsibility for their actions. It was time for Samantha to learn to face life, and he needed to give her that opportunity. He walked back to his desk, took the pen, and began writing a letter to Samantha. The letter wasn't about reproach or criticism. It was a message from his heart. He wrote about the unconditional love he had given her, the sacrifices he had made, and most importantly, the love he would always have for her, no matter what. But this time, he wrote about a decision. He would no longer support her financially. He could not continue to be her crutch if she wasn't willing to stand on her own feet. He knew this decision would hurt her, but he believed it was the right one. When the letter was finished, William didn't rush to send it. He sat there looking at the words on the paper, and in his heart he felt a sense of resolve. He was ready. He was ready to let go, to let Samantha stand on her own. He knew that true love was about giving and receiving, not unconditional indulgence, but teaching the ones you love how to stand strong. William took the letter, placed it in an envelope, and looked out the window. A light breeze blew through, carrying with it change, carrying with it the decisions he had made. He knew, no matter how hard it would be, no matter how many challenges lay ahead, at least he wouldn't have to live in exhaustion and stagnation anymore. He wouldn't have to indulge Samantha anymore. He would give her the chance to grow up, to learn how to stand on her own. And he believed that, in doing so, he was showing her the truest form of love. William's house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now stood in complete silence. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, but it no longer dissipated the heavy feeling that had enveloped the room. Each passing day, William felt as though he was living in a dream where every decision, every word became harder than ever before. He looked at the financial papers in front of him, where the numbers, the expenses, had gradually become an inseparable part of his life. Every amount of money sent to Samantha, every time she called and asked for help, all of it appeared like scars that he could never erase. That evening, after Samantha left, the house seemed to fall silent. They had had a long conversation, an encounter filled with mixed emotions between love and disappointment. William had done everything, but sometimes love wasn't enough to change a person. He looked at the mug Samantha had given him a few days ago. It wasn't a beautiful gift, not something that could evoke memories of the days when she was a naive little girl, but a cheap, soulless object with no real affection behind it. That gift was a painful reminder that his daughter had changed, had drifted away from the values he had tried to teach her. He had spent so many years nurturing and protecting her, and now he couldn't get anything in return but distance. Samantha's wrong decisions, the calls for help, the requests for money without any sign of change, all of it made him feel like a failure. And when he looked at the numbers on the financial papers, he realized something. Everything he had done for her seemed to have become meaningless. He looked out the window, through the frosted glass, seeing only the dim lights of the streets outside. Winter was approaching, and the cold seemed to make everything feel even more still. A sense of loneliness rose within William. He quietly asked himself, was his love strong enough to help Samantha change? Or was he the one getting in the way of her learning the lessons she needed to learn? He loved her, but he knew that love didn't always mean unconditional protection. A soft sound from the door startled William. He turned around to see Jessica standing in the doorway, her eyes quietly looking at him. Jessica didn't speak immediately. She just stood there, silently observing, but her gaze held a deep understanding. Jessica knew that in the past days, William had been facing a turbulent storm, one that no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't escape. She knew he was in pain because of Samantha, but she also understood that love was not unconditional sacrifice. Jessica walked into the room and sat next to William. She didn't say anything, just gently placed her hand on his shoulder, offering comfort, a companionship without words. She knew that at this moment, nothing could ease the exhaustion within him, but at least her presence would help him feel less alone. A gentle touch, a silent empathy, that was all she could do for him right now. William felt the warmth of Jessica's hand, but within him the weariness still didn't fade. He felt as though he was standing on the edge, where every decision carried unforeseen consequences. Over the years, he had given all his love and care to Samantha, but now he realized he couldn't keep going like this. She needed to learn to stand on her own. She couldn't live in the shelter of her parents forever, but giving up helping her was something he couldn't do easily. "What do you think about my decision?" William spoke, his voice hoarse, as if every word was caught in his throat. He didn't know where to start, but he felt the deadlock in his heart. "I love her so much, Jessica, but maybe I've spoiled her too much. Now, I can't keep going like this, but if I stop, will she be able to stand on her own? Am I doing the wrong thing?" Jessica didn't answer immediately. She simply looked at William, her eyes full of understanding. She knew he was torn inside, aware that he didn't want to hurt Samantha. But sometimes love didn't always mean unconditional protection. She also knew that if they didn't change, things would only get worse. "William," Jessica said gently, but her voice was filled with resolve, "I understand your love for Samantha. I know you want to do everything to make her happy, but you have to understand that love is not about endless protection. It's not about helping without change. We've given her everything, but if she doesn't learn to stand up on her own, if she doesn't change herself, then everything we do will only make her weaker." William was silent, his eyes fixed on the financial paper in front of him. Those numbers weren't just statistics, they were the choices he had made over the years. He had sent money, sacrificed precious time to help Samantha, but he realized that no matter how great his love, it wasn't enough to change her if she didn't change herself. He had spoiled her, been willing to do anything for her, without realizing that it had created a distance between them, a gap that couldn't be easily filled. "I don't know if I'm doing the right thing." William sighed, his shoulders slumping as if all the weariness within him had become too much. "Maybe my love for her isn't strong enough to change her." Jessica quietly placed her hand on William's, gently comforting him. She knew he was feeling like a failure, feeling like he wasn't strong enough, but she also understood that true love wasn't indulgence. It was giving in the right way, being firm when necessary. And as painful as it was, sometimes love meant leading the one you love stand up on their own and face their life. "You've done everything you can, William," Jessica said, her voice warm and gentle. "I know that. But now it's time for her to learn to stand on her own. I'll always be by your side, and I believe you're making the right decision." William looked into Jessica's eyes, his own eyes filled with emotion. He knew she was the silent companion in his life, always standing by him no matter how difficult things got. And in that moment, he realized that no matter what decision lay ahead, they would face it together. Without saying another word, Jessica stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside. William didn't speak. He just sat there quietly, feeling a sense of peace in his heart. They didn't need to say everything, but both of them understood that their quiet companionship was all they needed in these difficult moments. Together, they would find the way forward, no matter how many challenges lay ahead. One sunny morning, the air was fresh, just like any other peaceful day. William and Jessica sat next to each other in the familiar kitchen, enjoying a simple breakfast. Everything seemed to remain calm, but inside William, an undercurrent was rising, pushing him into a state of tension he could not deny. He had made the decision to no longer support Samantha financially, had said his refusal, had written the letter and sent it, but for some reason he still felt restless, as though he hadn't done enough. Would she understand? Would she accept his decision? Jessica noticed the deep thought in William's eyes. She knew he was struggling with his inner turmoil. She had always been by his side, sharing the emotional burdens. But this time, she knew William's decision wouldn't be easy to carry out. While she understood, as she had said, that love was sometimes not about unconditional indulgence, she couldn't help but worry about the consequences this decision would have on them. Then suddenly, without any warning, the living room door swung open. A familiar figure stepped inside, making William's heart tighten. Samantha. She stood there at the threshold, her face flushed with anger, her eyes brimming with tears, yet full of defiance. Her presence was like a storm suddenly breaking in the house, which had been filled with quiet. "Dad," Samantha called out, but her voice was no longer soft like before, no longer the sweet and loving tone William had once received. Her voice was like a sharp blade stabbing straight into his heart. "You never really loved me." William felt a violent shock when he heard those words. His whole body seemed numb, her words ringing in his ears like the echo of disappointment, of the years she had kept hidden inside. He couldn't believe that she would say such things. He had given his entire life to love her, to protect and care for her, and now she could say he had never truly loved her. The suffocating, numbing feeling clouded William's thoughts. He stood up and walked toward Samantha, trying to find the right words to respond, but every word seemed to choke in his throat. His heart was racked with those accusations, but he knew, no matter what he said, those words wouldn't change the truth inside her. "I love you more than myself, Samantha," William exclaimed, his voice choked. "I have done everything, sacrificed my whole life to help you. But I cannot save you by destroying myself." William's words echoed in the tense space like a painful confession. He wanted to tell her that everything he had done came from genuine love, from sacrifices without words. But perhaps those words no longer meant anything to Samantha. Samantha looked at her father, her eyes filled with anger, disappointment, and a sense of abandonment. She felt the growing distance between them, a feeling that had grown larger in her heart over time. But now, standing face to face with him, she couldn't hold back her emotions. She had endured too much, had lived in the absence of the affection and love she once craved. William's love, no matter how great, seemed unable to fill the cracks in her soul. "You don't really love me? You just love the way you want me to be," Samantha shouted, her eyes blazing with fury. "You never understood me, never saw who I really am. You only saw your expectations, your dreams for me to fulfill, but never saw me for who I am." Samantha's words hit William like a slap in the face, making his heart ache. He had done everything for her, but it seemed like all his efforts had been in vain. He had sheltered her, given her all his love, but now everything had become a burden in her eyes. He felt like a failure, as everything he gave didn't make his daughter feel loved. Jessica stood silently by the side, watching the tense exchange between the father and daughter. She couldn't help but feel heartbroken. She had witnessed William's devotion to Samantha, but she also understood that love wasn't about endless indulgence. Samantha needed to learn to take responsibility for her life, to face the consequences of her actions. But how could she say these things without hurting those she loved most? "You can say whatever you want, Samantha," William began, his voice lower but firm. "I can't continue helping you if you're not willing to change. I love you more than myself, but I can't save you by nurturing weakness and dependence." William's words, though sincere, were a truth Samantha couldn't easily accept. She stood there, her eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling from the hurt. She couldn't imagine that her father could say such things. She had grown so accustomed to his protection, so used to receiving unconditional help from him. And now, when everything began to change, she didn't know what to do. The feeling of being abandoned, of being let go, made her feel as though she was falling apart. "You've always wanted me to be someone else," Samantha replied, her voice breaking as if she could no longer bear it. "You always set expectations too high. I can't do it the way you want, because I'm not you. I just want to be loved for who I am." William felt his patience start to break, but he knew that without being firm, she would never learn to stand on her own. He quietly looked into Samantha's eyes, trying to remain calm, even though his heart felt like it was about to break. "I love you more than anything, Samantha," William said, his voice no longer filled with anger, but with pain. "But I can't save you by continuing to give you this weakness. You need to learn to stand on your own. You need to understand that life can't always be lived in the shelter of others." Finally, after a long pause, Samantha looked into her father's eyes. Her gaze was full of disappointment, but there was also a hint of realization. She couldn't admit it right away, but part of her understood that what her father was saying was true. Perhaps she had relied too much on her parents' love, too accustomed to being loved without having to give anything back. She had wasted too much time living in that protection. And now, when her father no longer served as her unconditional support, she felt confused and lost. "I don't know what to do," Samantha whispered, her voice weak, no longer as strong as before. "You will find your way, Samantha," William replied, his voice gentle but firm. "I believe in you, but you have to believe in yourself first." Their conversation had no resolution, no immediate reconciliation, but at least it marked the beginning of a new life, where Samantha would have to learn to stand on her own and face life. And William, though in pain, and though it was difficult, had started to understand that true love is about giving in the right way, helping her stand up, not always shielding her in the protective arms. The house was so quiet that you could hear every soft step, every breath of air, every passing moment. William sat in the living room, his eyes dull as he stared out the window where the sky had turned the red hues of sunset. The streetlights shimmered, but they didn't ease the emptiness in his heart. The feeling was indescribable, as if a part of him had shattered, leaving behind a void too large to fill. How many times over the years had William thought about Samantha, the daughter he had loved and protected, but now could do nothing to save? She had drifted away, no longer turning to him as she once did, no longer calling him hero, no longer trusting him like when she was little. Everything changed so quickly, and he hadn't realized when everything had slipped away. Despite all his efforts, all he received was disappointment, an ever-growing distance between father and daughter. The front door suddenly opened, pulling William from his thoughts. He turned around and saw Samantha's familiar figure walking in. She entered with eyes full of anger, her face flushed with fury. There were no greetings, no smiles, no loving gaze that William had once received. All that remained was hostility, pain, and disappointment. Samantha stood there, looking at her father without saying a word. It seemed like she didn't want to acknowledge his presence, as if she wanted to keep the distance between them so large it couldn't be bridged. But that only made William's heart ache. He knew that everything they had gone through had brought them to the edge of disappointment. But why did it hurt so much? How could his daughter look at him like a stranger, like an enemy? "Dad," Samantha spoke, her voice no longer soft like before. This time, her voice was full of anger, as if she couldn't take it anymore. "You never really loved me." Those words hit William like a slap in the face. He couldn't believe he was hearing them from his own daughter. How could he accept that the girl he had raised, cared for, and loved for so many years could say something like that? He looked into Samantha's eyes, but he no longer saw love, no longer the trust she had once shown him. All that remained was pain and an unbreakable hardness. I don't understand. You never really loved me, Samantha continued, her voice aiming to break everything between them. You loved yourself, loved what you wanted me to become, not who I am. I'm your daughter, but you never loved me as I am. Those words struck deep into William's heart. His whole body felt frozen. Every emotion inside him suddenly shattered. How could she say this? Everything he had done, all the sacrifices, the sleepless nights worrying about her. Why wasn't it enough for her to feel his love? Were her words true? Had he been too harsh, too indulgent, and thus pushed Samantha away? William stood up, determined not to let these words defeat him. But no, he couldn't be angry with her. She had been suffering too much, and he understood that in her angry eyes there was an unexplainable disappointment, the feeling of being abandoned, rejected. None of this could calm her. I love you more than myself, Samantha, William said, his voice choked but firm. I've done everything for you. I've sacrificed my whole life to help you. But I cannot save you by destroying myself. You need to learn to stand on your own, to take responsibility for your life. Samantha turned to look at him, her eyes full of hurt but also full of rage. She couldn't accept that her father could say these words. She had grown so accustomed to his unconditional love, to his shelter in every situation. But now, when she needed him most, he was telling her that she had to handle everything herself. You can't love me for who I am. You only love the version of me you want me to be, Samantha screamed, unable to hold back her fury. You never see me. You only see a reflection of yourself in me. I can't live the way you want. I'm not you. William stood there, his eyes blurred with pain. Samantha's words felt like a knife cutting into his heart, making all the emotions inside him become chaotic. But he knew she was right, no matter how much he loved her, no matter how much he wanted to help her. If she couldn't change herself, if she couldn't learn to stand up, everything would only make her weaker. The father and daughter stood in silence, neither of them saying anything more. The distance between them felt like an unbridgeable abyss, a crack that could not be healed. Samantha stood there, her eyes filled with anger and disappointment, while William's heart felt shattered, unable to close. Samantha turned her back and walked toward the door. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet space, but no one stopped her. No one said anything more. She left without turning back, without saying a word of goodbye. It was a decision, an ending without explanation. William couldn't stand. He just sat back down, his hands trembling as he held his face, unable to contain the pain inside. Tears silently fell, one drop after another, like raindrops hitting the ground. He felt nothing but emptiness. Everything that had passed, everything he had done, now felt like a pile of ruins that could never rise again. He loved Samantha so much, but he couldn't save her, couldn't live her life for her. Jessica stood silently beside him, seeing the pain on William's face. She didn't say anything, just gently walked over, sat beside him, and placed her hand on his shoulder. In the stillness, there was only silent empathy between them. Jessica didn't need to say anything right now. She just needed to be there, the steadfast presence that William needed. She knew that no matter how far Samantha went, no matter how harsh life became, she would always be the pillar of support for William. You're not alone, William, Jessica whispered, her voice gentle but full of conviction. I will always be here with you, to help you through everything. William didn't say anything, just nodded gently, then wiped his tears. He knew, no matter how everything might collapse, no matter how the wounds might not heal immediately, at least he still had Jessica by his side. She was the only one who would always be with him, never giving up, no matter how much pain he felt. They sat there, saying nothing, but in the silence there was a deep connection between them. In life, sometimes words can't heal all wounds, but silent companionship can help someone move forward. Even if Samantha left, even if their love was tested, William knew that, at least, he still had one thing to hold on to: love and the companionship Jessica gave him. Thank you, William whispered softly, his voice low and full of emotion. Thank you for always being with me. Jessica only smiled gently, saying nothing more, but in her heart, all the emotions were distilled through each passing moment, through every understanding she had for her husband. She knew whatever tomorrow might bring, at least they would face it together, no matter how difficult. The small room in William's house seemed to be enveloped by an unusual silence. The yellow light from the desk lamp shone down on the financial papers, the numbers that couldn't change, the expenses he had tried to balance, tried to control, reflecting a part of his life, a part of the sacrifices that William could never fully quantify. The long days filled with worry, anxiety about his daughter, his family, the future, seemed to have pushed him to the brink of exhaustion. The emptiness he felt when looking at those numbers was not just about money, but a feeling of failure, an emptiness deep inside him, an exhaustion that couldn't be explained. Every decision he made, every sacrifice he put into Samantha now seemed like broken pieces that couldn't be put back together. He had given everything but received nothing in return, no change from her. It felt like he was in an endless battle, and all his efforts seemed to never be enough to pull Samantha out of the pit she had buried herself in. William's hand trembled as he picked up the phone. The screen lit up, and Samantha's name appeared clearly. A heaviness surged in his chest, as if every time he saw her name, old wounds began to bleed again. This feeling, though familiar, still brought an indescribable discomfort. He had once given everything for Samantha, but now, had he been wrong by spoiling her, by giving without receiving anything back? He didn't want to see her fall any further, didn't want to pull her down this path, but how could he give up on his own daughter? Was it possible that in love, sometimes we are too blind to realize when it's time to let go? The phone rang again, this time louder, like an urgent call from Samantha, but William didn't answer. He stared at her name on the screen, his chest heavy, and a part of him knew that right now he had to do what he had long avoided. He had to refuse her. He had to refuse in order to let her take responsibility for her life, to let her learn to stand on her own. Everything around him seemed to fade away. He could no longer see the numbers, no longer hear the phone ringing, only the emotions inside him flowing like a wave. A part of him wondered if she would be angry with him, if she would feel abandoned. But another part, a stronger part, knew that this was the right thing to do. He had done everything he could, but now Samantha needed to learn to stand on her own, to face life without endless protection from her parents. William felt an emptiness fill his chest. The tears he had tried to hold back for so long began to fall. This time, the tears weren't from disappointment or loss. They were tears of liberation. A part of him knew that no matter how painful it was, refusing her, letting her stand up on her own, was the deepest way he could love her. He couldn't keep indulging her. Without change, without independence from her, everything would fall into despair. The phone rang again, but this time, William no longer looked at the screen. He reached up and pressed the end call button with a resolute determination. He had done this for her, for the family, for himself. He could no longer live in this endless cycle, giving everything without seeing any change. This release was necessary, and as painful as it was, he knew it was the right decision. Letting her love herself, letting her take responsibility, was the way he could help her grow. The tears continued to roll down William's cheeks, but this time they didn't carry a sense of failure. They were tears of letting go, tears of a father who had finally realized that true love wasn't about unconditional protection. Sometimes, love is about letting the one you love stand up on their own, face life and their mistakes. Jessica quietly entered the office. She saw William sitting there, still silent, but the tears had been falling for a while now. She didn't rush to ask, didn't need to say anything. She simply walked over, sat beside him, and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. As a wordless comfort, a silent empathy that could only be understood in silence. William didn't say anything, just felt the warmth from Jessica's hand. He didn't need to explain anymore, didn't need to say everything. She understood. She always understood him more than anyone else. How many times had they faced challenges together, stood firm through storms? And this time, even though it was painful, even though he had to let go of the things he cherished most, they would still face it together. Jessica didn't ask for an explanation, didn't wait for a reason. She just held William, gently rubbing his back. That was all she could do at that moment. She knew that, even if letting go was painful, it was the right thing to do. And even if Samantha didn't understand right away, she would understand one day. She needed to learn to stand on her own, to learn to solve her own problems in life. William finally stopped crying. He felt a sense of relief, though there was still some lingering sorrow in his heart. He knew that this decision wouldn't be easy for both father and daughter, but at least he no longer had to live in fear, in anxiety, in the anticipation of endless calls, requests from Samantha that weighed on him. He had done everything he could, and now he needed to let go, to let her learn to live and grow up. Jessica gently hugged him, saying nothing more, but in her eyes, in her gestures, there was all the comfort William needed. She knew that, no matter how far Samantha might go, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, at least they still had each other, and that was the most important thing. In the dimly lit room, only the soft light from the desk lamp illuminated. William no longer felt burdened, though the emotional wave inside him still remained. He knew that, no matter what, Samantha would learn to stand on her own, and he had made the right choice. When love must lead, go. When love cannot change everything, that is the liberation we sometimes need. The living room of William's house seemed to brighten with the first light of morning filtering through the delicate curtains. Long streaks of sunlight cast gentle lines on the floor, creating a peaceful scene as if life were offering a moment of calm after long nights filled with worry and stress. The outdoors was also gradually waking up. The sky was turning a soft shade of blue, and the morning breeze stirred the tree branches in the garden. Everything seemed refreshed, as if after storms, everything had found its peace. William sat at the dining table, the cup of coffee still warm in his hands, its aroma filling the room. He looked out the window, seeing a small bird perched on the sill, singing a clear tune that echoed in the stillness of the morning. The sound of that bird's song seemed like a symbol of freedom, of life returning after days of gloom. Those sounds, along with the warm light filling the space, brought William a sense of relief. No more tension, no more worries about the uncertain days ahead. Today, it seemed like everything was beginning to change. He no longer had to live with the anxiety about Samantha, no longer had to accept the phone calls he knew would bring endless requests. Although he had long avoided facing the reality that she had grown up and needed to stand on her own, today, when he looked at that small bird, he realized that life always offers moments of release, and moments like these, when the air is filled with peace, are the times he needs to reflect on himself, on everything he's done, and start anew. Jessica sat across from him, her eyes sparkling with gentleness and understanding. She watched William, knowing that he was deep in thought, wrestling with the feeling of change. She could tell he was struggling with so many things inside. But today, when she looked at the light shining on his face, she noticed a clear difference. There was no more tension like before, no more anxiety in his every gesture. She felt the release William had found in his heart, and she also sensed that, even though everything wasn't perfect yet, they had begun a new life, a life free from the weight of past decisions. "How do you feel?" Jessica softly spoke, her eyes filled with care and love. "The whole house is glowing now, isn't it?" William smiled, the first genuine smile he had shown in days. It wasn't a forced smile, not a smile out of obligation, but a smile of relief. He looked out the window, then turned back to Jessica. "You're right," he said, his voice gentle but full of determination. "Everything has changed, not just the house, but us too. It's time for us to live for ourselves, to live for the present and the future that we can build on our own." Jessica didn't say anything more, just smiled softly. She understood that not all difficult decisions bring immediate peace, but she knew that, no matter how long it took for everything to heal, at least they had stepped out of the darkness, out of the haunting fears of the past. They sat and ate breakfast in that peaceful silence without needing to say much. The simple flavors of the meal, the smell of the coffee, and the soft sounds of the world outside seemed to merge together into a peaceful symphony, perfect for this moment. There was no rush, no worries about unresolved issues, just the presence of one another, the understanding and love that had weathered many trials. William looked up at the bird outside the window, following its gentle movement. A small bird, like a part of nature, flying between the vast sky, unbound, unconfined. That sight made him suddenly realize something important. Just like the bird, he needed to find his own freedom. He couldn't keep living in relationships and decisions that couldn't be undone. It was time for him to learn to fly, to learn to live freely without being tied down by the past, by expectations, and by pain. I can't keep living in the past, William said, almost to himself. What's gone is gone. From now on, we need to live for ourselves, not for anyone else. Jessica looked at him with eyes full of warmth and understanding. That's right, William. We need to learn to live for the present, to live for what's happening now, and most importantly, to live for ourselves. William sat in silence for a moment, feeling each word in Jessica's voice. He knew she was right. They had lived too long in the darkness of anxiety, in the fear of what would happen, but now they could live a life unburdened. Everything wouldn't change immediately, but at least they had decided to live on their own terms. Thank you, William whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You've always been there for me, even in the toughest times. You're the only reason I can keep going. Jessica simply smiled softly, not needing to say anything more. She had always understood that love isn't about perfection. It's about walking alongside someone through the hardest moments. She would always be there for him, always walk with him, no matter how life changed. They continued their breakfast in that quiet peace. No more tension, no more worries about the future, just the present moment. The bird's song outside the window still rang out, a reminder of freedom and hope. No more burdens, no more darkness, only the light of a new day, of a new beginning. When breakfast was over, William stood up and looked at Jessica. Thank you for being with me, he said, his voice full of gratitude. I don't know what I would do without you. Jessica stood up, walked over to him, and embraced him. We'll get through everything, she whispered. No matter the challenges, no matter how hard it gets, we'll always be together. William felt the warmth of Jessica's embrace, and in that moment, he knew that no matter how life would change, no matter how many hardships they would face, they would always have each other. And that was the most important thing. The dawn had arrived. Not just a new day, but a new beginning. A beginning not bound by the past. A beginning not influenced by failures or worries about the future. They would live for themselves, live in the peace and freedom they had found. They had started again, and this time they would never look back. The morning sky was clear, with no clouds in sight, and gentle breezes brushed against the lush green garden. The sun had just risen, and the fresh morning air filled the space. William and Jessica stood in the backyard, where the warm golden light bathed the flowers and trees, bringing out their vibrant colors. Today was not just any other beautiful morning, but also the start of something new, planting a new tree. William knelt down, holding a small shovel, carefully digging a small hole in the ground. He looked at the empty plot before him, where a new life would soon be planted. Everything had changed, not just in the garden, but within their hearts. Each step they took today was a step toward freedom, a rebirth after months of anxiety and pain. They weren't just rebuilding their lives, they were proving to themselves that, no matter the challenges, they could start anew. Jessica stood next to William, her eyes filled with tenderness as she watched his every move. They didn't need many words, because their presence was enough. No need for conversation, just a glance, a gesture, everything between them was understood. They had been through so much, so many trials, but today, standing in the garden, both of them felt the peace, the liberation from deep within. William gently lifted the sapling from its pot and carefully placed it in the hole he had just dug, covering it with fresh soil. He looked at the young tree, then back at Jessica. Their eyes met in a quiet moment. In that moment, no more words were needed, as everything was communicated through their actions, through each small but meaningful gesture. Every scoop of soil, every pat of earth was like nurturing their own lives, planting a new beginning. And this sapling, just like them, would grow and thrive, no longer bound by the past, no longer fearful of challenges. Jessica gently bent down and lightly patted the soil around the tree's base as if welcoming the new life. She looked at William and smiled brightly. They both understood that planting this tree was not just a simple act, but a metaphor for their own lives. Like the sapling, they needed to learn to stand tall, no matter how many winds blew through, no matter how many storms came. "This is for us," William whispered, his voice soft but full of conviction, "not for anyone to take away." Jessica looked at him, her eyes filled with empathy and understanding. She knew this was the moment they had to live for themselves, not for anyone else. They had spent too much time worrying, sacrificing for others, but now it was time to live for their own lives. They had given too much without receiving anything in return, and now they had to learn how to take care of themselves, just as they were taking care of this tree. William took a bucket of water and slowly poured it onto the sapling as if watering himself, nurturing his own new life. Every drop of water, though small, was the beginning of new life, of growth, of rebirth, and William felt like a part of him, too, was being nourished, cared for, just like the tree. When they were done, William and Jessica stood in silence, watching the young tree stretch upward in the soil, waiting for its growth. Both of them felt a strange peace, a comfort they hadn't felt in a long time. They didn't need to say anything more. They had done what needed to be done. Like the sapling, they no longer had to depend on anyone. They would rise on their own, face every challenge on their own. "We'll take care of it together," Jessica said, her voice soft, filled with love. "Just like we'll take care of ourselves, right?" William turned to look at Jessica, his eyes lighting up, as if he had just realized something very important. "Yes, this is the first step, Jessica. A step toward freedom, a step toward the life we deserve to have." Jessica smiled, her heart filled with warmth. She looked at the sapling, then back at William. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that together they would walk it, not just for each other, but for themselves. They had lived too long for others, sacrificing and giving without receiving anything in return. Now they needed to learn to live for themselves, and that journey would begin today. In this moment, they stood quietly, watching the sapling stretch upwards in the soil, feeling the life, the peace it brought. It felt like a new beginning, a new life, free from worry, free from invisible barriers. They would face every challenge together, but this time they would do it for themselves. William took a deep breath, feeling the freshness of the morning air. He smiled, but this smile wasn't from exhaustion or worry. It was the smile of someone who had found peace. In that moment, he realized that life could be difficult, but at least now he wasn't afraid anymore. He no longer worried about the things he couldn't change, about the people who couldn't change. He just needed to live for the present, to live for what he could do for himself. "This is the beginning," William said, looking at Jessica with determination in his eyes. "We're starting over, from the smallest things. And this time, we'll live for ourselves." Jessica nodded, smiling. "Yes, for ourselves." We deserve that in this moment, in the sunny garden, they had found freedom, the release from the years before. A new life had begun, not just because of what they wanted to do, but because they had learned to love and take care of themselves. They no longer worried about what had passed, no longer feared the challenges ahead. They had taken control of their lives, and the road ahead, no matter how difficult, would always lead to a hopeful future. The morning light shone through the house, and the sapling in the garden began to reach up strong and steady. Just like them, it would rise, stand strong, and find new life in its own journey. The evening in William's house had a different kind of beauty, one that contrasted sharply with the evenings filled with anxiety and tension he had experienced for so long. The dim light from the desk lamp cast a soft glow over the old family photographs. The photo still sat in its usual place on the wooden table in the living room. William looked at the picture and his heart sank into a sea of emotions. It was a family photo from a time long ago, a time filled with happiness, when Samantha was still a child, her innocent eyes looking at her parents with trust and love. She had not yet faced the world outside, and the anxieties of her parents had not yet begun to weigh heavily on their shoulders. Looking at the photo, William felt himself grow younger, briefly transported back to a time when everything seemed perfect. A complete family with smiles and sweet moments, moments that seemed they would last forever. But now everything had changed. Samantha had grown up, had her own life, and was no longer the innocent girl she once was. The relationships within his family were no longer the same, and his desires and hopes, along with his relentless efforts, had been tested by unavoidable changes. William placed the photo down on the table, his gaze quiet and deep. He sighed, his hands clenched as though trying to hold on to those irreplaceable memories. But in his heart, a change had taken place. He realized that no matter how painful it was, no matter the wounds that might never heal, the love he had for Samantha and Jessica still existed. But there was one thing he had never truly understood over all these years. Love was not always about unconditional protection. Sometimes love is about giving the person you love the freedom to be and knowing when to let go. Jessica entered the room, light as a breeze, and looked at the family photo. She stood quietly for a moment, sensing the change in the air in William's eyes. She knew that, no matter how much pain he had passed through this difficult moment, she didn't need to ask. She didn't need to say anything. She just needed to stand by his side, to be his companion, the one who would always be there to face every challenge with him. "I know what you're thinking." Jessica spoke gently, her voice a comforting, soothing presence. "Those memories will always be with us, but now we have to learn how to move forward. The three of us, we need to change, we need to keep moving." William turned to look at her, his eyes filled with resolve, though not without fatigue. He knew Jessica was right, but he also understood that no matter how much changed, his love for her and for Samantha had never wavered. And though he had to give up things he cherished most, he would never give up on her, never give up on the ones he loved. "I've always thought love was about protecting, nurturing, never letting go," William said, his voice low, as though tired. "But I was wrong. Sometimes love is letting the one you love have their freedom, letting them find their own way, even if it hurts us." Jessica gently moved beside him, placing her hand on his shoulder without saying anything more. She simply stood there, allowing William's words to sink into her heart. She understood him. She understood that love wasn't always about constant presence, but sometimes it was about stepping back, letting the other person rise, letting them face their own life's challenges. And in love, sometimes we have to learn to let go. William closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the change within his soul. He was tired, not because of a lack of love, but because of too many hopes, too many desires that Samantha would change, would see things differently. But now he knew that no matter how much he loved her, he could not live her life for her. He could not protect her forever. He couldn't save her by nurturing her dependency. It was time. Samantha had to stand on her own. He opened his eyes, looking at Jessica with a gaze full of emotion. "Love is not always about yes. Sometimes it's about no," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Only then can we preserve what is most sacred. That is freedom. Jessica didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him, her eyes bright with profound understanding. She knew that, from this moment on, they would walk into a new life, a life no longer bound by demands, expectations they couldn't control. She understood that if they wanted happiness, if they wanted a meaningful life, they had to learn to love themselves first before they could love anyone else. "You're right," Jessica whispered, her voice soft, full of affection. "We can't keep living for others. We have to live for ourselves. And loving ourselves is the only way to preserve the most sacred thing, love." William looked at Jessica, his eyes full of gratitude. He felt the change in her, in them. They had been through so many storms, so many trials, but now they had found their own path, a path no longer burdened by the past, no longer filled with fear or worry about things that couldn't be changed. They had learned to live for themselves, and only when they did that could they live a happy, fulfilling life. They stood side by side, hand in hand, looking at the old family photo. Everything in it had changed, but the love in their hearts remained. Love was not always about protection, about holding tight. Sometimes it was about giving each other freedom. Only when we allow the ones we love to stand on their own, to face their challenges, can we truly keep that love in our hearts. Can we preserve what is most sacred? They didn't say anything more, standing in silence, letting their thoughts and emotions settle in their hearts. In the quiet of the house, they felt the peace they had found. It was a peace not born from perfection, but from acceptance, understanding, and the sincere love they had for one another. Love was not about possession, not about unconditional protection, but about freedom and allowing others to live their lives in their own way. In that moment, they didn't need to say any more words. Everything had already been expressed through actions, through the companionship in life. William and Jessica, hand in hand, had found peace. In the end, the story of William and Jessica closed not with a tragic or vengeful ending, but with profound healing, acceptance, and the necessary act of letting go. Just as they had learned on their journey, sometimes love is not about desperately holding on at any cost, but about learning to let the ones we love be free, to find their own path. They had overcome suffering, loss, and now, in the light of a new beginning, they realized that the most important thing was to love themselves first. Stepping out of the shadow of the past, William and Jessica found a peaceful life, free from endless burdens and expectations. And that was the most subtle and powerful revenge they could offer themselves, a life full and free. In the gentleness of difficult decisions, they found liberation, not in revenge, but in acceptance and change. This story is not just about complex relationships. It's a lesson in forgiveness, patience, and how we can heal ourselves with every small step we take. Because sometimes the only way to truly win is to allow yourself the freedom to walk forward without the shadows of the past. So, what do you think of William and Jessica's healing journey? What did they do to find peace after all the turmoil? Have you ever faced a painful choice and realized that sometimes the greatest love is letting go? Share your thoughts below, and let's expand the story of forgiveness and true love together.